On the morning of March 15, 2017, the residents of Dubai Marina's most exclusive tower awoke to the harsh wail of police sirens cutting through the desert silence. Emergency responders flooded the 43rd floor of the Al-Kazemi family penthouse, where they discovered a scene that would shock even seasoned investigators. The body of Manuel Padilla, a 28-year-old Filipino driver, lay lifeless on the marble floor, a heavy gold chain wrapped around his throat. Standing in the corner, trembling in a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, was his wife Bianca, her eyes wide with a terror that spoke of unspeakable horrors witnessed in this temple of wealth and power. Dubai in 2017 represented the pinnacle of modern ambition, a city where glass towers pierced the sky like crystal daggers and fortunes were made and lost with the shifting desert sands. Behind the glittering facade of this metropolis lay an intricate hierarchy that few outsiders understood. At its foundation were nearly 3 million expatriate workers, their dreams of prosperity built on visas that could vanish with a single phone call from their sponsors. The Filipino community alone numbered over 700,000, forming the backbone of Dubai's domestic service industry, their remittances home exceeding $2.8 billion annually, each dirham representing sacrifice and hope in equal measure. Within this system, certain families wielded power that transcended mere wealth. The Al-Kazemi dynasty stood among Dubai's most influential, their construction empire having shaped the city's skyline for 3 decades. With assets estimated at $2.3 billion, they owned hotels that housed royalty, developments that redefined luxury, and connections that reached into every corridor of power. Their compound in Emirates Hills sprawled across 15,000 square feet, complete with private beach access, staff quarters that housed dozens of workers, and security systems that rivaled government installations. Sheikh Bassam Al-Kazemi, the family's second son, represented everything Dubai's elite valued and feared in equal measure. At 42, he remained unmarried despite pressure from his traditional father, preferring instead to collect experiences and beautiful objects with the same calculated precision he applied to business deals. His Oxford education had polished his natural intelligence into something sharp and dangerous, while his return to Dubai in 2015 had coincided with a series of scandals that the family's lawyers worked tirelessly to suppress. Staff turnover in his personal employ occurred with suspicious regularity, each departure accompanied by non-disclosure agreements and generous severance packages that bought silence as effectively as they bought loyalty. The Sheikh's penthouse office served as his private domain, a space where priceless Persian rugs covered floors heated to the exact temperature of human skin, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of a city he helped build. Those who knew him described a man who viewed the world as an elaborate chess game where every piece, from business rivals to household staff, existed solely for his amusement and advancement. Into this world of impossible luxury and hidden cruelty stepped Bianca Padilla, carrying dreams as fragile as the rice paper her grandmother used for prayers back in Cebu City. Born in 1995 to a family that knew poverty as intimately as breathing, Bianca had grown up watching her widowed mother clean houses for wealthy families, her hands growing rough from chemicals and her back bent from scrubbing floors that cost more than their annual income. The eldest of 4 children, Bianca had sacrificed her dreams of nursing school when her father died in a construction accident, instead taking any job that would help feed her younger siblings. Her marriage to Manuel in 2022 had been arranged through family connections, a practical union born of desperation rather than romance. Yet as months passed, genuine affection had blossomed between them, built on shared dreams of a better future and the quiet understanding that came from parallel struggles. When Manuel's steady employment with the Al-Kazemi family secured him a visa renewal and the possibility of bringing his wife to Dubai, it seemed like answered prayers. Bianca arrived in Dubai in January 2017 on a tourist visa that Manuel's sponsor quickly converted to dependent status, a gesture of goodwill that came with unspoken expectations of gratitude. Her first glimpse of the Emirates from the airplane window had taken her breath away, a city that seemed built from light itself, where even the airport gleamed like a palace. The reality of their accommodations in Soniper's labor camps provided a harsh counterpoint to those first impressions. But Bianca adapted with the resilience of someone who had never known certainty. Their small room, shared with minimal privacy, became a sanctuary where they whispered plans for the future over shared meals of rice and canned goods. Manuel's salary of 2,500 dirhams monthly left little room for luxuries after sending 1,800 dirhams home to support their families. But Bianca's natural optimism found beauty in their modest existence. She learned basic Arabic with the same determination that had carried her through her difficult childhood, recognizing that language could unlock opportunities that remained closed to those who relied solely on English. Manuel Padilla embodied the quiet dignity of millions of overseas Filipino workers who built other nations' dreams while deferring their own. Born in Mindanao in 1994, he had grown up understanding that success would require leaving everything familiar behind. His 3 years as the Al-Kazemi family's driver had earned him a reputation for absolute discretion and unwavering reliability. He knew which routes avoided traffic, which conversations to forget immediately, and which silences were worth more than words. His relationship with Bianca had surprised him with its depth. What began as a practical arrangement had evolved into something precious and genuine, built on shared late-night conversations about home and quiet moments of understanding that needed no translation. Manuel's protective instincts ran deep, rooted in traditional values about a husband's responsibility, but he also recognized his wife's intelligence and supported her desire to contribute to their household income. The decision to let Bianca take additional work as a babysitter hadn't come easily, but economic necessity left few alternatives. Manuel trusted his wife's judgment and character, and the Al-Kazemi family's need for reliable childcare seemed like a perfect opportunity. He had no reason to suspect that his employer's brother would view his wife as anything other than domestic help. No warning that some predators wore the finest silk and spoke in cultured voices that disguised the darkness within. Sheikh Bassam Al-Kazemi's interest in beautiful women was well documented among Dubai's social circles, though the details were carefully managed by publicists and lawyers who specialized in discretion. His psychological profile, had anyone dared to compile one, would have revealed patterns that mental health professionals recognized as dangerous. Narcissistic personality disorder combined with obsessive tendencies created a toxic mixture of entitlement and compulsion that viewed other human beings as objects to be acquired, possessed, and ultimately discarded when their novelty faded. The Sheikh's Oxford education had taught him to recognize vulnerability and exploit it with surgical precision. He understood that desperation made people pliable, that small kindnesses could purchase loyalty more effectively than large sums, and that the right combination of hope and fear could transform even the most resistant individual into a willing participant in their own destruction. His previous relationships with household staff followed predictable patterns that investigators would later piece together with growing horror. The stage was set in those first weeks of 2017 for a tragedy that would expose the darkest corners of Dubai's glittering facade. In the marble corridors of the Al-Kazemi compound, where the scent of jasmine couldn't quite mask the smell of exploitation, 3 lives would intersect with consequences that none of them could foresee. The golden chain that would ultimately become both symbol and murder weapon hung in the Sheikh's private vault, waiting to claim its victim in a story where wealth and power would prove more deadly than any weapon, and where love would become both the greatest vulnerability and the final casualty of unchecked obsession. February 2017 marked the beginning of what would later be recognized as a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Bianca Padilla's first day at the Al-Kazemi compound began at dawn, when she boarded the staff transport bus that wound through Dubai's sprawling suburbs toward the glittering towers of Emirates Hills. Her assignment seemed straightforward: care for Sheikh Bassam's nephew, 6-year-old Khalid, and his 4-year-old sister Noor while their parents traveled extensively for business. The children, products of wealth and privilege, initially regarded her with the casual indifference reserved for household staff. The villa itself defied comprehension for someone raised in Cebu's modest neighborhoods. Italian Carrara marble floors stretched like frozen lakes beneath crystal chandeliers that caught desert sunlight and transformed it into rainbow prisms dancing across silk-covered walls. The infinity pool seemed to merge with the Arabian Gulf horizon, while indoor gardens bloomed with jasmine and roses that required teams of botanists to maintain. Every surface gleamed with the kind of perfection that could only be achieved through unlimited resources and obsessive attention to detail. Within this palace, a rigid hierarchy governed every interaction. Senior staff, mostly Lebanese and Egyptian nationals who had served the family for decades, commanded respect and obedience from newer employees. Bianca occupied the lowest rung, her status as temporary babysitter marking her as both invisible and expendable. Other Filipino workers, recognizing a fellow countryman struggling to navigate unfamiliar customs, offered subtle guidance through meaningful glances and whispered warnings in Tagalog when supervisors weren't listening. The children, starved for genuine maternal attention in their world of rotating caregivers, attached themselves to Bianca with surprising intensity. Her patient bedtime stories, told in careful Arabic mixed with animated gestures, delighted them in ways that expensive toys never could. During afternoon rest periods, she would braid Noor's hair while humming lullabies her own mother had sung, creating moments of authentic connection that contrasted sharply with the artificial perfection surrounding them. It was during one of these intimate scenes that Sheikh Bassam first truly noticed her. Standing unobserved in the nursery doorway, he watched Bianca read from a children's book, her pronunciation careful but confident, her voice gentle as honey. When she glanced up and saw him, the surprise in her dark eyes was quickly replaced by respectful acknowledgement. "The children love your stories," he said softly, his English accent polished from Oxford years. "You have a gift for making them feel safe." The compliment, delivered with apparent sincerity, planted the first seed of what would grow into something far more dangerous than either of them initially understood. Over the following weeks, Sheikh Bassam's presence in the children's wing became increasingly frequent. He would materialize during story time, claiming concern for his nephew's education, or appear in the kitchen while Bianca prepared the children's meals, praising her creativity and dedication. Small gifts began appearing with increasing regularity. A bottle of expensive French perfume, presented as something to make the children's rooms smell pleasant. Designer scarves, justified as protection from the desert wind during outdoor activities. Each offering came with elaborate explanations that made refusal seem both ungrateful and impractical. Bianca accepted these tokens with growing unease, her Catholic upbringing warring with the undeniable pleasure of owning beautiful things for the first time in her life. The Sheikh's research into her background proved both thorough and devastating. During casual conversations, he would mention her mother's arthritis with touching concern, suggesting that Dubai's advanced medical facilities could provide treatments unavailable in the Philippines. He spoke knowledgeably about the rising cost of education for her younger siblings, offering to arrange scholarships through his family's charitable foundation. Each conversation reinforced her dependency while demonstrating his power to transform her family's circumstances with the stroke of a pen. "You're too beautiful to waste your talents in that labor camp," he told her during one of their increasingly frequent private conversations. "Your husband is a good man, but he cannot give you the life you deserve. I could help your family in ways he never could, if you would allow me." The words were delivered with such apparent sadness for her circumstances that Bianca found herself comforting him rather than questioning his motives. Her internal conflict intensified with each passing week. The rosary she carried, a wedding gift from her grandmother, seemed to burn against her palm during evening prayers as she struggled to reconcile her growing attraction to luxury with the moral teachings that had shaped her character. She began staying later at the villa, finding excuses to avoid returning to the cramped quarters she shared with Manuel. When she did come home, their conversations grew stilted and artificial as she practiced deception for the first time in their marriage. The children's bedtime ritual on March 8, 2017, would later be identified as the evening everything changed. The staff had been dismissed early for a Muslim holiday, leaving Bianca alone with the children and Sheikh Bassam in the vast, echoing mansion. After settling Khalid and Noor in their beds, she found the Sheikh in his private study, apparently deep in melancholy reflection. "Sometimes I wonder if all this wealth is worth the loneliness," he confided, gesturing toward family photographs that showed him always on the periphery, always watching rather than participating. His vulnerability seemed genuine, his pain authentic as he spoke of family pressures and the burden of expectations that came with his name. When he reached for her hand, ostensibly seeking comfort, Bianca didn't pull away. The kiss that followed was soft, tentative, presented as spontaneous emotion rather than calculated seduction. In that moment, surrounded by opulence that made her feel like a character from the fairy tales she read to the children. Bianca allowed herself to believe in the possibility of transformation. The gold bracelet he pressed into her hands afterward bore an inscription in Arabic that she couldn't read. "To remember this moment," he whispered, his voice rough with what sounded like genuine emotion. The implicit understanding that their encounter must remain secret needed no verbal expression. The weight of her visa status and Manuel's employment hung between them like invisible chains. Her behavior at home began changing in ways that Manuel couldn't ignore. New perfumes, subtle but expensive. Clothes that seemed too fine for someone earning babysitting wages. Most troubling, an emotional distance that created space between them even in their small shared room. When questioned, Bianca's explanations grew increasingly elaborate, her discomfort with deception evident in every defensive response. The loving wife who had once shared everything with him was slowly being replaced by someone he didn't recognize, someone whose eyes held secrets that seemed to exclude him entirely. Within weeks, the Sheikh's attention transformed from flattering courtship into something far more possessive and demanding. Phone calls that had begun as pleasant check-ins became hourly requirements for location updates and photographic proof of her activities. Gifts escalated from thoughtful tokens to expensive jewelry that carried implicit expectations of gratitude and compliance. The golden chain, when it first appeared around her neck, seemed like the ultimate symbol of his affection and her elevation above her circumstances. Only later would she understand that what felt like adornment was actually a collar, marking her as owned rather than loved, possessed rather than cherished in a game where the stakes would prove far deadlier than she could have imagined. By mid-March 2017, Manuel Padilla could no longer ignore the transformation of his wife. The woman who had once shared every detail of her day now guarded her phone like a state secret, flinching when it buzzed with messages she refused to let him see. Her wardrobe, once consisting of modest dresses purchased from Dubai's discount markets, suddenly included silk scarves that cost more than his monthly salary and perfumes whose bottles gleamed like precious gems. Most disturbing was the emotional chasm that had opened between them, a distance that no amount of gentle questioning could bridge. The expensive jewelry appeared gradually, each piece accompanied by increasingly elaborate explanations. The pearl earrings were borrowed from the Sheikh's sister for a staff celebration. The diamond bracelet was a bonus for exceptional childcare. When Manuel discovered the gold chain nestled in tissue paper, its weight substantial and its Arabic engravings clearly indicating ownership rather than employment recognition, Bianca's explanation crumbled into defensive anger that revealed more than any confession could have. Manuel's investigation began with careful conversations among the Filipino drivers who gathered each evening outside the labor camp gates. Their whispered accounts painted a disturbing picture of Sheikh Bassam's reputation. Stories of household staff who had disappeared suddenly with generous severance packages and signed documents ensuring their eternal silence. Ahmad, a Pakistani driver who had worked for the family longer than anyone, pulled Manuel aside one evening with eyes full of sympathy and warning. "Your wife is beautiful, brother," he said softly. "Beautiful women in that house. They don't stay just babysitters for long." The financial evidence proved impossible to ignore. Their joint account, which had maintained a careful balance hovering near zero for months, suddenly showed deposits that Manuel couldn't explain. When confronted, Bianca's claims of overtime pay and holiday bonuses fell apart under basic mathematical scrutiny. The sum of her alleged earnings exceeded her official salary by nearly 300%, figures that would have been laughable if they hadn't been so heartbreaking. Traditional Filipino masculinity, with its emphasis on protection and provision, crumbled under the weight of his growing certainty. The husband who had promised to shield his wife from the world's cruelties had instead delivered her directly into the hands of a predator. His internal torment manifested in sleepless nights and distracted days, his usually impeccable driving becoming erratic enough that other Al-Kazemi family members began to notice and comment. The choice between confrontation and willful blindness tortured him, each option carrying consequences that threatened to destroy everything they had worked to build. The final confrontation erupted on a Thursday evening in their cramped apartment, the space feeling even smaller under the weight of unspoken accusations. Manuel's voice, usually gentle and controlled, cracked as he demanded the truth about the chain that caught the fluorescent light with every movement of her throat. Bianca's lies, polished through weeks of practice, finally shattered completely. Her defensive fury revealed the depth of her deception while simultaneously confirming his worst fears. The temporary separation that followed left both of them isolated in their shared guilt and mutual betrayal. Sheikh Bassam's response to the marital crisis demonstrated the calculating precision of his psychological manipulation. Within days, Bianca found herself installed in a luxury apartment in Dubai Marina. The lease paid for 6 months in advance and every detail designed to demonstrate her elevation from her previous circumstances. What appeared as generosity was actually imprisonment disguised as privilege, complete with security personnel who monitored her movements under the pretense of protection. The Sheikh's control extended into every aspect of her existence with suffocating thoroughness. Her clothing, selected by personal shoppers from the world's most exclusive boutiques, reflected his tastes rather than her preferences. Her meals, prepared by private chefs, catered to his dietary philosophies while ignoring her own cultural food preferences. Even her communication with family in the Philippines passed through channels he controlled, allowing him to shape the narrative of her success while monitoring any signs of wavering loyalty. The penthouse became both paradise and prison, a space where crystal and marble provided backdrop for increasingly disturbing displays of ownership. Photography sessions, presented as documentation of their relationship, created archives that served multiple purposes. Evidence of her willing participation for potential legal protection, blackmail material should her cooperation waver, and personal trophies for his private collection. His introduction of her to business associates as his special friend marked her publicly as his possession while providing legal cover through the ambiguity of their official relationship status. Other household staff, recognizing the dangerous trajectory of events, began avoiding Bianca entirely. Their fearful glances and hurried exits whenever she appeared spoke to knowledge of previous incidents that the family's legal team had successfully buried. The Sheikh's increasing paranoia manifested in jealous rages triggered by imagined slights and perceived disloyalty, violence that started with thrown objects and escalated to physical intimidation that left bruises she learned to hide with expensive makeup. Manuel's decision to fight for his marriage came after weeks of consultation with Filipino community leaders and underground networks that supported expatriate workers facing exploitation. The discovery of other victims, women whose stories followed disturbingly similar patterns, provided both validation and horror. His formal request for a meeting with Sheikh Bassam was motivated by desperate hope that reason and respect for family honor might prevail over obsession and entitlement. The pregnancy scare in early March served as catalyst for the final tragedy. Bianca's panic at the possibility of carrying the Sheikh's child triggered discussions of permanent arrangements that chilled her blood. His casual mention of surgical procedures that would ensure her exclusive availability revealed the depth of his objectification and the extent of his long-term planning. Her secret attempt to contact Manuel, discovered through his surveillance network, unleashed a rage that transformed the sophisticated businessman into something primal and terrifying. The meeting arranged for March 15th represented the Sheikh's arrogant confidence in his absolute power over the situation. His agreement to see Manuel was motivated not by respect but by desire to deliver a final humiliation that would cement his ownership of Bianca while destroying any remaining hope of reconciliation. The penthouse office, with its commanding views of the city he helped build, seemed the perfect stage for demonstrating the futility of challenging his will. Neither man could have anticipated that the golden chain, symbol of possession and control, would become the instrument through which obsession would transform into murder, and paradise would reveal itself as hell. The evening of March 15, 2017, began with the call that would seal 3 fates forever. Manuel Padilla's formal request for a private meeting with Sheikh Bassam had been granted with surprising ease. The Sheikh's agreement motivated by arrogance and a desire to deliver what he considered a final lesson in power dynamics. The penthouse office on the 43rd floor, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Dubai Marina's glittering towers, seemed the perfect stage for what the Sheikh anticipated would be Manuel's complete humiliation and surrender. At 9:30 p.m., Manuel entered the office with the quiet dignity that had defined his character throughout 3 years of faithful service. His approach was measured and respectful, the bearing of a man who understood his precarious position but refused to abandon his principles. He had prepared for this moment through sleepless nights of prayer and consultation with community elders, steeling himself for whatever consequences his words might bring. "I come to you as one gentleman to another," Manuel began, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "I ask only for my wife's release from her current employment. We will return to the Philippines immediately, with no scandal, no questions asked. Your family's reputation will remain untouched." His appeal to honor reflected his belief that even the most powerful men could be reached through appeals to basic human decency. Sheikh Bassam's response revealed the depth of his contempt for such naive assumptions. His laughter echoed through the marble-clad space, a sound devoid of warmth or humanity. "Your wife," he said, moving to his private safe with theatrical deliberation. "Let me show you exactly who your wife belongs to now." The display that followed was calculated cruelty at its most refined. Jewelry boxes opened to reveal treasures worth more than Manuel's lifetime earnings. Photographs documenting intimate moments designed to wound rather than merely inform. "She wears my gifts, sleeps in my bed, carries my mark around her throat," the sheik continued, his voice growing more venomous with each revelation. "What exactly can you offer her that I cannot? What protection? What future? What life worth living?" The psychological torture was methodical, each word chosen to strip away Manuel's sense of worth and agency while reinforcing the absolute nature of his defeat. The moment when Bianca entered the office, summoned by the sheik's imperious gesture, marked the point where humiliation transformed into something far more dangerous. She appeared in the doorway wearing the silk dress he had chosen, the golden chain catching the office's crystal lighting like a collar of ownership. Her eyes, once bright with love for her husband, now reflected only terror at being caught between two worlds that could no longer coexist. "Tell him," the sheik commanded, his hand possessively gripping the chain around her neck. "Tell your husband who you belong to now. Tell him about the life I've given you, the future we're planning together. Tell him how I've offered to buy you properly, to make you my wife once his inconvenient existence is resolved." The proposal, delivered as casual business transaction, revealed the depth of his delusion about human relationships and the extent of his plans for permanent possession. Manuel's composure finally shattered at this ultimate degradation. The man who had built his identity around protecting and providing for his family found himself confronted with the complete failure of both duties. His desperate lunge forward was not an attack but a final attempt to reclaim some fragment of his shattered masculinity, to prove that love could still triumph over wealth and power. The sheik's reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Years of unchallenged privilege had never prepared him for physical resistance from someone he considered beneath notice. His rage at being touched by his social inferior triggered a response that bypassed rational thought entirely. The golden chain, yanked from Bianca's neck with violence that sent her sprawling, became both symbol and weapon in a moment of pure, calculating fury. The strangulation that followed was neither crime of passion nor moment of temporary insanity. As the sheik wrapped the chain around Manuel's throat, his movements were deliberate and controlled, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of absolute dominance finally achieved. "She was always mine," he whispered into his victim's ear as life faded from Manuel's eyes. "From the moment I saw her, she belonged to me." Bianca's screams shattered the office's oppressive silence, her voice raw with horror at witnessing her husband's murder and recognition of her own complicity in the tragedy. The sheik's immediate transformation from killer back to concerned lover demonstrated the compartmentalization that had enabled his predatory behavior for years. "It's all right now," he murmured, attempting to embrace her blood-spattered form. "Now nothing can separate us. We can finally be together properly." The cover-up that followed revealed extensive experience with similar situations. Security personnel appeared with suspicious promptness, their movements suggesting rehearsed procedures for managing accidents involving household staff. Plans were discussed with businesslike efficiency. Body disposal, story coordination, financial settlements for any inconvenient questions. The sheik's casual references to previous incidents made clear that Manuel was not his first victim, merely the latest obstacle to be eliminated. But Bianca's psychological collapse proved beyond his ability to manage or control. The woman who had been gradually molded into willing participation could not be transformed into active accomplice to murder. Her incoherent sobbing and repeated confessions of guilt created noise that neighboring residents reported as domestic disturbance, bringing police response that arrived before the Sheikh's cleanup could be completed. When officers entered the penthouse office, they found a scene that defied the Sheikh's desperate attempts at explanation. Manuel's body lay beside the golden chain that bore the Sheikh's initials, while security footage and witness testimony created an unshakable foundation for murder charges. The evidence of systematic predation, financial manipulation, and psychological abuse emerged through investigation that revealed a pattern of exploitation spanning years and multiple victims. The golden chain, which had begun as symbol of the Sheikh's affection and evolved into instrument of control, ultimately became the murder weapon that ensured his destruction. Justice, delayed by wealth and privilege, finally arrived through the testimony of traumatized victims and the unshakable evidence of one man's refusal to surrender his wife to a predator's obsession. The investigation that followed Manuel Padilla's murder became a watershed moment for Dubai's justice system, forcing unprecedented scrutiny of the invisible hierarchies that governed expatriate worker lives. Dubai Police's elite major crimes unit, typically reserved for cases involving terrorism or organized crime, found themselves navigating the treacherous waters of prosecuting one of the Emirates' most powerful families. International media attention exploded within hours, with headlines focusing on the stark wealth disparity that had enabled such systematic exploitation. The Filipino consulate's involvement added diplomatic complexity to an already sensitive case. Ambassador Maria Santos arrived personally to oversee the investigation, her presence signaling that this tragedy would not be quietly buried beneath legal technicalities and financial settlements. Meanwhile, the Al-Kazemi family's legal team, a battalion of international attorneys specializing in crisis management, worked frantically to contain the reputational damage while preparing an increasingly desperate defense strategy. Evidence gathered painted a comprehensive picture of predatory behavior spanning years. Security footage from multiple locations documented the Sheikh's systematic isolation of victims, while financial records revealed a pattern of expensive gifts followed by emotional manipulation. The digital trail proved particularly damaging. Recovered text messages showed calculated planning, deleted browser histories revealed research into psychological control techniques, and surveillance equipment found in Bianca's apartment demonstrated the extent of his obsession. Most devastating were the testimonies of previous victims who emerged from shadows once protective legal barriers crumbled. 5 women, representing different nationalities and backgrounds, shared remarkably similar stories of grooming, manipulation, and abuse. Their courage in speaking publicly despite obvious personal risks provided crucial corroboration for Bianca's account while establishing the systematic nature of the Sheikh's predatory behavior. Bianca's testimony, delivered over 3 emotionally grueling days, became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Her detailed account of psychological manipulation, gradually escalating control, and ultimate witnessing of murder was delivered with devastating authenticity. Her admission of complicity, rather than undermining her credibility, actually strengthened it by demonstrating brutal honesty about her own choices and their consequences. Her cooperation with prosecutors, despite obvious trauma, provided the narrative thread that connected months of evidence into a coherent story of exploitation and murder. The trial itself became a media spectacle that exposed uncomfortable truths about power dynamics in Gulf society. Sheikh Bassam's defense team initially pursued a strategy of character assassination, attempting to portray Manuel as a jealous husband and Bianca as a willing seductress who manipulated their client. This approach backfired spectacularly when additional evidence emerged showing the Sheikh's long history of similar relationships with vulnerable employees. The Sheikh's own courtroom behavior proved catastrophic to his defense. His arrogant dismissal of testimony from mere servants, his visible contempt for the proceedings, and his apparent belief that wealth and status placed him above accountability alienated even sympathetic observers. When confronted with security footage showing him strangling Manuel with the golden chain, his attempt to claim self-defense crumbled under cross-examination that revealed the calculated nature of his actions. The verdict, delivered after 18 hours of deliberation, sent shockwaves through Dubai's elite community. Sheikh Bassam Al-Kazemi was found guilty of premeditated murder, human trafficking, sexual coercion, and abuse of power. The life sentence handed down represented more than individual justice. It served as notice that traditional protection for the wealthy would no longer shield them from consequences of their actions. The aftermath extended far beyond individual punishment. Bianca's deportation to the Philippines following her testimony came with the devastating discovery of her pregnancy, a final cruel reminder of her exploitation. Her family's rejection, motivated by shame and social pressure, left her isolated with only the support of human rights organizations and fellow survivors. Her struggle as a single mother carrying both new life and crushing guilt would continue long after the legal proceedings concluded. Systemic changes followed public outrage over the case. New visa regulations provided additional protections for domestic workers, while increased oversight of sponsor relationships aimed to prevent similar exploitation. The Al-Kazemi family's business empire suffered significant damage as international partners distanced themselves from the scandal, forcing painful restructuring and reputation management efforts that would span years. The legacy of Manuel Padilla's murder extends beyond individual tragedy to serve as cautionary tale about the intersection of poverty, power, and vulnerability. Educational programs now use the case to teach recognition of manipulation tactics, while legal precedents established during prosecution provide tools for future cases involving wealthy perpetrators. The golden chain, presented as evidence during trial, was ultimately melted down and the gold donated to organizations supporting exploited workers. Its transformation from symbol of ownership to source of healing provides fitting metaphor for justice emerging from tragedy. The questions raised by this case continue to resonate. How do we protect the vulnerable in foreign countries? What responsibility do communities bear for recognizing warning signs? These questions demand answers if similar tragedies are to be prevented.